Brantford, Ontario, and I grew up in a very traditional family. However, I was born very, very premature. My mother said that she could hold me in the palm of her hand. I was so small, and I was given miracle drugs at that time. I think they were called penicillin. It was just amazing that this new thing that had come out. But I also suffered from my immune systems and different thing else. And it was up to my grannies on the reserve that they actually thought that I was worthy. And so they rushed me to the hospital in Brantford so that they could take care of me. But as a result, I was always the sickly kid, and I always had to stay home. And I didn't really understand, what a joy or a gift that was. I always saw it as, oh my God, I couldn't do what everybody else did, and I have to sit and listen. And I was honored to have my great grandmother and my grandmother and my grandfather there who were with me all the time. And during that early years, I would sit on my great grandmother's knee and she would tell me all of the stories that she could remember. And there were literally thousands of them. And they covered everything that you could think of. And because I couldn't go outside, I would hear these stories about different things, about praying mantis, about the corn, beans, and squash, and all of these things. And it would really, really make me think about who I was. And so I think that's what got me interested in the sciences and in the world around me. That's a little bit about me. But before we go much further, I'd like to do a short opening for us so that we can get our minds into the right place where we can think about the things that we think might be important. Now, you can tell me if I get this right. Can you see that? It tells me I'm sharing the screen. Anybody can tell me,
Yes, it looks good.
Okay.
Looks good.
So among our people and the native people in general, at almost any place I've been in the world, from New Zealand to wherever, there's always an opening done. And it's similar in fashion, depending upon who the people were. The Haudenosaunee called this the words that come before all else. And so everything that was spoken before this is just getting to know each other. This is where we really start. And we say that whenever we are gathered, one of us is chosen to give greetings and thanksgiving. And we always think about our own families first and the people around us. And so the people are the first things that we think about and look at and appreciate who they are. And so I would ask you all to bring together your minds and think about the people of this world. And can we agree they are important to us? We know that the Mother Earth is continuing to care for us because she supports us in every way. And we say, if you look at the color of the soils of this world, you'll see the color of all of our skins, and you'll know that she's our mother. And so I ask you to bring together your minds and think about the Mother Earth. And can we agree that she is important to us? We know that the waters and the fishes out there are continuing to care for us. And they even give of themselves that we may be able to nourish ourselves and that cool water to cool us. And it's continuing to carrying out those responsibilities they have to us and to creation. And so I ask you to bring together your minds and think about the waters and the fishes of this world. And can we agree that they are important to us? We celebrate the plants that grow around us. The Haudenosaunee talk about the three sisters, the corn, beans, and squash. But we know that all of the plants have medicinal purposes as well, if not for us as human beings, but also for the animals that surround us. And they know how to use their medicines in order that they maintain their health. And so I ask you to bring together your minds and think about those plants of this world. And can we agree that they are important to us? We know that the animals, that we're not alone here, and that there are animals in this world. And in the trees behind my house here, there's a rookery for the crows. And at 5 o'clock in the morning, while sometimes I may not appreciate it, I can hear them squawking out there and waking us up to a brand new day. And we know that their songs and the things that they talk about are important to us. And some of those animals that we keep in our own homes, and we call them our pets, but we treat them like our brothers and sisters. And so I would say to you that all of the animals and birds of this world deserve to be treated samely. And so I ask you to bring together your minds and think about those plants and think about those birds and animals. And can we agree that they are important to us? We also think about the trees that give so much of themselves that we may be able to live in comfort upon this world. And so I ask you to bring together your minds and think about the trees. And can we agree that they are important to us? We know that there are 4 great winds that blow across the surfaces of the earth. And we are now entering into the spring winds, but soon the warm summer winds will come. And then we'll go back into autumn and the winter winds will blow again. And during this time, this moon, for example, this new moon that's out today is called the thunder moon by our people. And that's to honor the thunderers or the grandfathers. Those grandfathers speak to us in a loud voice that we may be able to hear them. And what they're saying is for us to be ever vigilant as we walk across this land, because the world is changing and will continue to change. And we must learn how to adapt to those changes and be ever conscious of them. And so I ask you to bring together your minds and think about those 4 great winds and those thunderers. And can we agree that they are important to us? We know that our elder brother, the sun, has raised them today, as he has done millennium after millennium, never ceasing in his responsibilities to us and to all of creation, that we could carry out our responsibilities. Thus, this would truly be a wonderful thing. And so I ask you to bring together your minds and think about our elder brother, the sun. And can we agree that he is important to us? I'm stepping ahead of myself there because I was thinking of the grandmother moon. And I'm thinking about the new moon and the thunder moon that's out there right now. And that 28-day cycle is the cycle of all female things upon this world. And without that 28-day cycle, there would be no children. And it would truly be a lonely place. But she's also very powerful. And she has the ability to move all of the waters of this world, even the waters of the first environment, the womb. And so I ask you to bring together your minds and think about the grandmother moon, and through her, all female things upon this world. And can we agree that she is important to us? When we look into the skies, we're filled with awe as we see the stars shining down upon us. The Haudenosaunee say that those stars are our aunties and uncles, and they watch us as we are working and doing our responsibilities on this world. And they remind us in the positioning of those stars and the constellations of our ceremonies that must be done at certain periods of time. The thunder ceremony may be held first because what we will hear is the first thunder of this year. And when we hear that thunder, we know that the spring has come and that the grandfathers are returning. And so I ask you to bring together your minds and think about those stars. And can we agree that they are important to us? We also know that this is a spiritual world and that there are many different spirits around us. And we know that if we ever had a quandary that we can't really understand and that we need some help with, if we look deep into our hearts and souls, 4 great sacred beings will come to us to show us how to live in peace and harmony. And so I ask you to bring together your minds and think about the spiritual world that surrounds us. And can we agree they are important to us? We now celebrate the teachers of this world. And I know that many of you are students and you're learning many of the things that will help you in your lives. We know that your grandfathers and your grandpeople, your elders, also have great knowledge and can help you. And we say also that some of those teachers aren't even human, but they are the animals and the birds that surround us and all of the plants that are here. And they too can teach us. We also say that sometimes from the smallest voices in your community can come great wisdom, and they can show us the way to live in peace and harmony upon this world. And so I ask you to bring together your minds and think about the teachers of this world. And can we agree that they are important to us? So we say, now I've come to a place we will light our council fire, that we may each be able to warm ourselves around that fire. But before I do that, I'm but a human, and I can forget things. And so I ask you to send greetings and thank yous to the things that I might have forgotten, or those things that are very important to you, because I live a long ways from you and may not have the same environment as you that is important. So could you please send greetings and thank yous to those things that I might have forgotten. I also say that in our society, we say, in order to fulfill our responsibility for today, we tie a stout cord around us that we all may be able to stay here and listen and interact together. And so now those words have been spoken and our council fire lit. And I call on you, my friends, one last time to bring together your finest thoughts and your finest Thanksgiving, to pile it in a huge pile before us, to send to the creator of all things for the beauty that surrounds us. This Thanksgiving address for the Haudenosaunee, and like I said, it may be different in other places, but this Thanksgiving address has been with us for about 1,200 years, back to the formation of the Haudenosaunee and the Grand Council. It starts each one of our councils and our meetings and ends our meetings. I use it when I wake up in the morning to give thanks to the things around me. And when I go to bed at night, that's the last thing I think before I go to sleep, to give thanks to those things. It's very much a part of who we are as Haudenosaunee people. And we honor it by looking at it in our way. And nowhere in that Thanksgiving address do we talk about law or rights. The things that we talk about are our responsibilities to all of those things that are there. I remember when I was 12 years old, I was frustrated about the Thanksgiving address, because my grandfather said, you have to take care of all those things. And I was frustrated. I said, well, Granddad, I don't want to take care of everything. Oh, that's too hard. It's too hard to do that. My grandfather sort of laughed at me and he said, son, he said, that aren't you proud? And I said, what do you mean? She said that the creator of all things gave you a responsibility to care for the world and to care for all things around you. And that he or she or it thought that you could do this. Isn't that something to be proud of? And I said, well, I never thought of it that way. He said, all of the other peoples have been given responsibilities as well, and they fulfill those responsibilities in different ways. And so again, this Thanksgiving address becomes a source of pride for myself and my people. The other thing it does in this modern world at Haudenosaunee is this is the environmental framework by which we evaluate, or our environmental assessment process uses as the framework for all projects that we do in the community. As you can see, as you go down the list, yes, of course, you want to think about the people. If you're going to build a store or a road, you want to know if the people are going to use it, who's there, what it's going to be done. You want to know all those things about our own regulations that are necessary, and also what the outside people will require of us. The Mother Earth, of course, you can't do anything without looking at the geomorphology, the geology, the geography of the area. And of course, we're going to take care of the water, because water is protected by our women. And so our women will come forward and tell us how we should be caring for the water and what ceremonies need to be done. And in those waters, we also know that there are the fishes that feed us. And so we don't want to hurt them. And so we have to take care to make sure that that road or project won't interfere. And so each one of those things that you see there, all are evaluated, all are looked at, and it requires a lot of knowledge from our communities in order to be able to do it. An interesting one for the people is that we were building a new old folks home. And so the engineers and the architects came in and they were all looking at it, and they were looking for land, and they said, well, we should put it here because it's a nice open area and we can do that, and that would be a good place to put it. And I can remember this whole row of grandmothers sitting there and grandfathers, thinking, and they went, no, won't work there. And these engineers said, why? It's a perfect area. Look, flat, and we can build it, and so on and so forth. No, here's where we want to put it. And it was right next to the public school. And the engineer said, well, it's so close to the kids and the kids make noise and it's going to be disturbing. And one of the oldest grandmothers there looked at him and said, to who? These are our children. We can sit at the big windows and watch them play in the yard, and it gives us hope for the future. Today, every one of the schools in Haudenosaunee is built either next to a school or next to the daycare or next to a place where we can see the children. And the funny thing about it is that there's a sign put up on the fence that says, no, 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 you're not supposed to go into the old folks' home. So where's the first place the kids go when it's recess? They sneak into the old folks' home in order to talk to grandma or great grandmother or the aunties and uncles. And it makes them both alive, that they're aware of who they are and what they're doing. This would never have been evaluated if we hadn't looked at it from our own point of view and how we do that. Engineers and people like that have no problem with the right down to the thunderers. Everything on top of that is evaluation and a normal environmental assessment. But when you get down to the thunderers, you're starting to look into spiritual world. You're starting to look at problems, mediations, and how we can work those things. And when you get to the sun, moon, and stars, suddenly you're looking at dark skies. And we've long since known that the dark skies are important to us. They fall right apart when you get down to the sacred beings, the teachers, and the creator, because they have no science for that. But we do. We have a way of looking at those things and evaluating whether that will be important. I'm a biologist. I'm trained in the sciences, but it never ceases to amaze me when we do environmental assessments, for example, for housing, that a housing lot that's there for somebody to build their house on, and we do the plant evaluation of it. We find plants on that plot that would be helpful to the family that's going to build their house there. So if you completely clear the lot, you're getting rid of the medicines that could actually help them. And so through our building techniques, we're looking to see how we can keep those plants there so that they can help the family, whether it's with the diabetes, obesity, or whatever that they may have problems with. The plants come to them to see that. And as a biologist, I keep thinking to myself, how do they know? How do they know that they're needed by that place? And as a scientist, is there any way for me to analyze that, to see how we can maybe enhance the areas where we know that they might be needed? And so there's a whole raft of tools that Indigenous people have that we can use in order to make our places better. So this Thanksgiving address has manifested itself in many different ways in our community and how we look at the world around us. I put this picture up because it's one of those pictures that when I went to university, way back when, my kids asked me, did you write on slates when you went to university? Did you have pens? And I said, I'm not that old, But again, back then, I can always remember listening to my professors in anthropology that I had taken. And the way they talked was like there were maybe at the most 1,000 people in North America before contact, and that we were all savages running around naked through the woods. And I knew that that was wrong. The history of my people and from the legends that my great-grandmother told me, we've been on this land for thousands and thousands of years, perhaps even hundreds of thousands of years. And we've lived here on the world in a different way, very different way than those that did in Europe. It's interesting to me that when I talk to historians, they talk about the wars in Europe almost incessantly. And yet when you talk to indigenous people, when you ask them about how their definition of war is, their definition of war is maybe 5 men beating on top of each other. It's not 100,000 people on the battlefield. So there's a difference on how we look at the world. I think before contact, this map that you see here was all of those colors blended together. The borders between each of the nations there were probably 200 to 300 miles thick or kilometers thick. Really hard for a GPS person or a GIS person to draw the line on a map. The Haudenosaunee people, which are in this area, knew about the people on the West Coast. We called those the people that held up the sky. And when I asked my great-grandmother about that, she said, oh yes, they stand on top of each other and make great pillars into the sky. And at the top, there's usually a bird of some type, and its wings hold up the sky on that side for us. And I said, Grandma, that must be amazing to see. Oh yes, they've been there for a long, long, long period of time. And it wasn't until I went out to Haudenosaunee that I saw the totem poles and saw that they represented families as they went up. And many of them had birds on the top of the totem pole. And to my people that had gone out there, we saw that as being very important and that they held the sky up. And so we traveled all over North America at that time, and there were millions of us. I always tell you that the Haudenosaunee, we were farmers, and so therefore we had huge farmlands in this area, and we interrelated with all of the other people in that sort of turquoise area. But that for example, the city of Onondaga, which is near Syracuse, had something like 60 to 70,000 people living in it. And it was a huge community. And that wasn't the only one. There were thousands of those among the Haudenosaunee, and they traveled across the land in order to protect them. So we had ways in which we could live with the Three Sisters, with how we utilize the land, that we could keep propagating this ourselves. We didn't look on the Anishinaabe, who were hunter-gatherers, and looked at the world differently. They were just our neighbors, and they were our friends. And we would meet in certain areas to exchange goods and talk. And also our men could look at their women, and their women could look at our men. And so we would have families that would be on both of those countries. We did have fights. And as my great-grandmother was said, we didn't fight over resources because there were so much resources. So if you needed something, you used it. But she said, yep, but men will fight over women. And so those were what most of the battles in North America were like, is they were like, as my granddad said, like the punch-ups outside of a bar after it closes at night between a bunch of guys. You know, these were not huge wars like the 100 Years' War that spread across Europe. Again, our people utilized the land around us, and we used it for thousands of years. So we know as much about the animals and lands, both on the surface, but also deep into the land. And many of our works, for example, on aquifers and things like that, we know a lot about. And we had special people who could tell us about those waters. And while we didn't have great universities and great institutions, each family and stuff would travel from place to place, talking about their medicines, exchanging information, and special people were used in order to know that knowledge. The knowledge of the treaties, for example, were kept by truth sayers, people who could literally recite everything that was said at a treaty meeting because they were told and remembered what that said. In Canada and the United States, that type of knowledge is now being respected in the courts, as the courts understand how much care was taken to save that understanding and knowledge. So as a biologist, I was learning from my grandfather far before I went to university. And I had sometimes a hard time with my university professors because they would say things that I knew wasn't true. And so it became difficult sometimes, and I had to put tape on my mouth in order to make sure that I could think about those what they were telling me. One of the best stories I have for that is the story of the praying mantis. And to this day, I remember that the insect person that was teaching me said that, oh yes, praying mantis females eat the male every time after they copulate. And I thought to myself, wow, that sounds weird. It sounds interesting. And that was just accepted. That's what it was about. But when I was young and used to run through the cornfields, I loved watching praying mantis. And I watched them all the time because they loved living in the corn, in the upper canopy of the corn, where they could catch all of the flying insects. I later found out that, yeah, that was very vital to the three sisters because it was a natural type of insecticide or pesticide. And they protected those three sisters in their plants. But I also know that I watched them while they did copulate. And not all of the males got eaten. Some of the males, the little really fast ones, could get in, do their business, and get out before the female could actually catch them. The reason that I heard from my biology prof, ecology prof, and insect guy was that this was a free meal for the female when she was carrying eggs. But when I pushed it further and looked at it further and analyzed it better, what I realized is that if she ate the big slow males, then natural selection said that the males would get faster and faster, and so would her children. So what did you want? A big slow, I want to almost say stupid children, or did you want really smart, fast ones? And so again, you see natural selection pushing the praying mantises faster and faster and faster. And it wasn't until years later, again, that in my entomology class, that I found out that praying mantis females can store eggs from different partners because they mate a number of different times. So what eggs would she use? She would probably use the fastest ones of those little fast guys and absorb all the rest of them. So there's good ecology there that our people had observed, but it wasn't in the type of science that we look forward in this way as well. I've heard the same story from Mexican people about black widow spiders and how they eat the male. But there's some things there that the Mexicans told me about how they work. But I'm terrified of spiders, so I don't like sitting watching them too much. But I was told by one of their medicine people that they act differently than the scientists believe. So North America, there's many stories here that I think are useful to our people. My daughter right now is teaching in Halifax, but she's doing a master's degree in geology. And what she's doing is she's collecting all of the stories of rocks and how they are used by not just the Haudenosaunee, but other people. She's studying the rocks out, the artifacts out there to see where the stones come from, so she might be able to map out these trade areas, because she knows she's seen Haudenosaunee arrowheads among the Mi'kmaq people, and we were very close. So there must have been a trade route there established in order to trade the materials needed for those arrowheads. So she's looking at that type of question. And it's interesting that her geology folk, her other geology professors, are interested in too, because they're finding things in different areas that just shouldn't be there. And as they say sometimes, well, it must have been carried by the glaciers. Well, it might have been carried by a Haudenosaunee or a Mi'kmaq person, but because they needed it. So these type of stories are useful to the sciences, because as a scientist, I want to know how these things progress upon the land. The other place that I've just been flabbergasted is I'm also interested in cosmology and the smallest things in the universe, and quarks and all of those type of things. And it's interesting to me that Lagala Sioux is being looked at by string theory people as a language that they can use, because Lagala is able to talk about 11 to 24 different dimensions in this world. And as the string theory people and the Lagala Sioux talk together, they have found a common language that they can describe their science better. I think that's fascinating, that a language maybe 10,000 years old may be useful in a science that will take us probably another 1,000 years into the future. I like to talk about traditional knowledge sometimes, but one of the problems that I have is that, excuse me, one of the problems I have is that there are a lot of myths about traditional knowledge. One of the myths is that only Native people have it. You know, only if you're Native can you have traditional knowledge. That's not quite so true. I've been all over the world, but what I found is that people who live close to the land, they have a traditional knowledge. I was talking with a peasant, a French, he called himself a French peasant, whose family had lived on the land for 1,200 years. And when he talked about La Terre, he was talking about the Mother Earth, the same as I was. And when I talked with his family and watched how they lived according almost to those Thanksgiving dress I saw. And they had a deep reverence to the land. I was in Germany, in the Black Forest, and I was talking to one of the burghers there, whose family has been there for years and years and years, maybe centuries. And he talked to me, and we were talking about the Mother Earth. And I said, but you guys believe in the fatherland, don't you? And not the Mother Earth. He says, oh, no, Henry, you got it wrong. Maybe you don't understand the way we talk sometimes. But he said, we talk about the fatherland, but the fatherland is always on that Mother Earth. And then he showed me a pictures in art of how they portray the motherland. And she was a great buxom lady, just happy and taking care of everything, child on each hand, and doing things. And all I could think about was my aunties and aunties as they took care of our family. And I could see my own mother in that sort of image. So I think that traditional knowledge, everyone has it. It's just that the people who link it back to the earth, are the ones that have that specific type of traditional knowledge that is very useful to us. We also say that TK or traditional ecology, is being lost and needs to be saved, and that it can be stored in databases and saved in books and those type of things. And yeah, you can save some of it in that way. But how do you save the spirit? How do you save those stories? I've heard a great many really good scientists. I had the pleasure of talking to Nicholas Tenbergen on animal behavior. And it was interesting to me that we got into a discussion about horror movies and how horror movies exemplify the societies in which we live. And I was surprised, because here was a man who was a great thinker on how animals behave, and yet he had all of these other ways he looked at the world. And when we had a fire because it was in the winter, and I threw some pine boughs onto the fire so that the room would smell good. And when he came in, he said, "Oh, Tannenbaum, I have not smelled this in a long time." And he felt completely at ease, just the same way my grandfather would. And so, again, I began to see these similarities. Sometimes I'll hear that people say that traditional knowledge doesn't change and is static, and that it doesn't need or use science. Well, I hate to tell you, but I think it does. It does change. Our people during the Ice Age had to learn to live with the ice. We had to change. We had to use observation, build hypotheses, experiment in order to be able to live in that environment. It was just that our experiments that if they didn't work, our village may have starved to death. And so those powers of observation became different and much more powerful as we go into the world. We say that it's traditional knowledge is anecdotal. I've heard it said almost like it was a slur. But what is science? Science is anecdotal. That's what a journal is about. You know, when I see scientific articles written about an experiment or something, or a great philosophy or something that somebody has discovered, what is that except a story? A story told in a very specific way. Our people tell stories too, and we tell them in very specific ways. And I made a practice of looking at our legends and seeing if I can see what the land looked like at that time. Being a biologist, I'm always interested in the stories, and those stories have sometimes incredible detail about what the land looked like. One of the most famous stories for the Haudenosaunee is the story about the flying heads, the flaming heads, that when our people first came into this area after the ice, we moved in, and there was a legend or a story that went around about a great, huge flaming head that was crossing across the land. And that if it came upon a hunter, it would swoop down and would incinerate the hunter or eat the hunter. And so these were terrifying to our people that they were doing that. And as a boy, I looked at in fascination and told my grandma, "What, are they still here?" "Oh," she says, "I don't know. We haven't seen them in a long, long time. But you better be careful when you're out there. You know, make sure you're always get across the creek. Make sure that one of the dogs go with you," because the dogs were what helped a hunter that was out on the land when those were coming to try and eat him. And it was the dogs that sacrificed themselves in order that the hunter got away. And to this day, the Haudenosaunee celebrate a white dog ceremony during our year, in which we celebrate that animal and all of the animals that help us. But the flaming head was interesting because I made a lot of friends with a lot of different people, and I made a friend with a physicist in Arizona, and I told him the legend and asked him what he thought it might be. And he said, "Well, that's a good question." He said, "One of the things that we are thinking about is a thing called the Pizarro effect." And the Pizarro effect is all of you might have seen it. It's that lighter that you had, not the Bic that has scraped the flint, but the one that you pressed and it would click. And if you looked inside, you saw a little spark. And that is the Pizarro effect. And what it is that inside the lighter, there's a little pressure point where when you click it, pressure is put onto a crystal. And when it's released, the crystal gives up that energy as a spark. Well, North America was a huge Pizarro effect. When the glaciers melted and all retreated to the north, the land began to rebound. And in the area where the Haudenosaunee were, in the St. Lawrence River Valley, it was all granite. It was Precambrian shield. And so as it rebounded, huge static electricities were released into the air. And of course, as they traveled along the surface, they were looking for a place where they could ground themselves. And humans and animals are perfect conductors for that. But the story says that if you could get across the creek, then you'd be saved. Well, yeah, because if you cross the creek, that ball lightning would have went into the water and dissipated and been gone. And so there's interesting facts in that. We had to know that there was not many trees because they would have ground it out through the trees. We know that there was a lot of water, so that there must have been there. So when I look at that, I look probably about 9,000 to 10,000 years ago is what that land looked like at that time when people were moving in. So it gives me some indication of what the land looked like and what we were dealing with. They also have a story about 10-foot or 7-foot high mosquitoes too. But I can see how that would be, as the muskeg must have been really horrible after the glaciers revolved. And the mosquitoes and black flies must have been just enormous. So anecdotals. Yes, it's anecdotal, but I think so is science. They say sometimes it's not objective, but it has to be objective because we depend upon the knowledge there in order to save ourselves. And that it's more spiritual and mystical than factual. It has a huge basis in fact. It's just that we have other tools for the spiritual and the mystical side of our knowledge as well. And that somehow traditional knowledge is the same throughout the world. You know, I, as a traditional knowledge holder, I could go to Africa and I'd be all right. No, I need and I depend upon the people there. If I go up into the Arctic, I want my friends, the Inuits, there to be beside me because I don't know that area. I don't know it. And so as a Haudenosaunee scientist going into the Arctic, I have to be humble before people have more knowledge than me about how to live on the land. And so again, it taught us humility about how we could interrelate with each other. So these myths have been myths that have been carried on as we've lived here. There are many more, but these are the ones that I choose to pick out because when I'm talking to you, you may run into those sometimes. And I think they're important that we question them. How do we deal with each other? We deal with each other in a very simple way as Haudenosaunee. We were very warlike. In our past, we talk about how we fought each other and that we coveted everything that you could think of. And that the peacemaker came to us and whispered in our ear how to work, how to live together. It was not a great, huge, long orator about, you know, great things and principles and so on and so forth. The peacemaker gave us 3 words. And those 3 words were strong enough to change the whole thinking of the Haudenosaunee into one in which we concentrate on what peace is and how peace works. And remember, a very warlike people suddenly at 1200 years ago began to change and to look to see how we could use those words of peace. I've translated them from what we call the Great Way of Peace or the Great Law of Peace, or my great-grandmother used to say, the way to be nice, how we be nice to each other. And I've translated it for working with my own communities and working with outside communities and developing the relationship between them. Little bit of Hollywood, call it the zeal to deal, in order that it's not the deal we're worried about. It's developing the enthusiasm to work together. So how do you do that? What you need to balance is respect, equity, and empowerment. So respect, we need tools for respect. We need understanding. Do I understand you? You know, you'd think that we've lived together for 500 years that you would understand us. Well, I'm not so sure we do because we haven't talked effectively over the time. We have to communicate, which is that talking. We have to be able to speak to you and you to us so that you can see who we are. We have to build methods of building consensus, not domination or voting, but consensus where we can agree. We have to have mediation processes that will allow us to be able, when we do have a dispute, to work them through. And also we have to have honor. You know, when we say something, That must be the truth as we see it. Equity, of course, everybody knows about finances, but it's amazing how much work gets done without any money. Again, I look at the money economy as only the icing on a big cake. How much money does my wife get, for making supper and taking care of my children? I couldn't afford to pay her to do that. But that's all part of the economy. And she looks to me for many different things that I can do for her and for my family. And yet, that's maybe not as valued as, for example, the economic economy. Knowledge is valued. What you know. My grandfather was a millwright, but he loved religions. And so he would study those, and people would come to him and ask him about it. And they gained knowledge and power from that. Networks. We all have networks of work. Hunters have networks of people. Fishers have networks. Medicine people. But so do you. You have your friends and networks of people that you know that will help you in different ways. Personnel. We need people that can do the work that is necessary for that deal. And then we need social or political power. And many people don't realize in Canada that the Native people have always had great political power, great social power, in which we can influence the governments. In order to get the truth and reconciliation work that is being done now, it's taken all of our ancestors to push the newcomers to a place and educate them enough so that they can understand why they should be doing this and what the benefits would be. I say that my great-grandmother used to have to fight in order to be recognized as a human being. My mother, she had to fight against residential school, 60s scoop, and all of those things. My daughter, I hope, doesn't have to fight as much. I hope that she will be recognized for the huge, beautiful brain that she has. And she will continue to work and help us all advance in different ways. We also have to empower ourselves. And it's a word that I have a hard time with because in Haudenosaunee, Mohawk languages, and all of the Haudenosaunee languages, we are verb-based. So every thing to us is an action. Peace is not a static thing where you lay down and go to sleep. Peace is just like war. You have to wage peace. You have to go out and do things actively. Maybe as simple as having a dinner in order to help create peace. And so we looked at empowerment is that translation from the noun peace into the verb of peace. You empower yourselves to do things. Application for universities, authorship. The number of times that people came to our communities to mine knowledge from my grandfather, grandparents, aunties, and uncles was enormous over my lifetime. I would have liked to have seen them recognized. I would have liked to open the journal sometime and see my grandfather's name there, because the knowledge that was used in that article came from him or came from my grandmother. I see that many places now, Indigenous people are becoming the authors. I always liked the Journal of Improbable Results is a sort of a spoof, but they did one on authorship in which they had an article written on authorship that had 932 words in it, and the paper had 932 authors. So one of those authors had to write the word "the." I think any one of our people could do that. So again, we have to start thinking about how we honor those people that we have knowledge with. I was most proud that when the State University of New York gave me a Doctor of Science degree. I look on that as recognition from my peers of all of the work I've done with Haudenosaunee and the various others over literally 30 to 40 and 50 years. in order to do that. My friend of mine who's a Haudenosaunee said, it's not fair. He said, you worked for 40 or 50 years, produced many different papers, and now they give you a Doctor of Science degree. He said, me, I worked for a mere 3 years, produced a paper that a whole bunch of people read, and they gave me a PhD. He said, you should have got one a long time ago. So again, among our people, we recognize knowledge and we recognize it as being important. I think my grandmother should have got 3 PhDs for all of the things she knew. We also develop credibility between each other. We develop partnerships and we accept responsibility for what we do. And that becomes a really sign of respect for each other. And so what you see is it loops back. Suddenly you have more respect for each other. You're willing to put more equity on the table. And then you're willing to empower yourselves to do more. And as I tell my graduate students that I've overseen their theses for, they've all said, well, we want to get involved with Native people. And I said, well, that's a very dangerous thing you're going to do there. And they said, why? I said, because Native people don't forget. We remember who you are, and we will follow you, and we will come to you when we need you. And if you need us, we will come and help you too. So that deal will continue on into the future. And you hear our people talking about building relationships. We build relationships with everything. All of those animals, all of the trees, everything around us. So the Great Way of Peace was the way in which us as Haudenosaunee expressed that way in which we work together. And I've used it many times with non-Native people. The Eastern Ontario Model Forest uses this zeal to deal as the way in which they do forest work in our area. And if you go to the Forest Chronicles, there are 2 papers in there done by, one by Patty Story and another one by Elizabeth Holmes, that used the Way of Peace in order to how they would work together and then how they would evaluate their success or their failures. Because if you don't respect somebody, you're not going to get very far. If you don't have enough equity, you're still not going to get very far. And if you don't empower each other to do something, that relationship won't grow. I also wrote this up as a business model and presented it at the Schulich School of Business in Toronto. And what happened was is that the MBAs there that listened to it were all excited and they wanted the book. And I said, well, I'm sorry, the book hasn't been written because that's just the way that I know it to be. So those 3 words, that respect, equity, and empowerment, is the constitution of the Haudenosaunee. It's only 3 words. Any child on our reserve can tell you what the 3 words are, but it takes a lifetime to unpack them in order to understand how they work. This is the group of people that I work with, and I wanted to use it in the last few seconds here to talk about the IJC a little bit. These are 6 commissioners from the IJC. Marilyn Fells on the one end there with me and Pierre Bellin. And then we have Jane Corwin, Rob Sisson, and Lance Yohe from the United States. And remember that these are put on the IJC from the Prime Minister of Canada and from the President of the United States. So Trump was the person who put the 3 American Republicans on the IJC. And we were quite worried. But when we got together and we started to talk about the Great Lakes and the boundary waters, we began to see how our visions were similar and how we could work together and how we could do that. And they asked me, they say, what are tools that we could use? And so one of the first things I did in the first year there was I explained to them the Great Way of Peace and how that Great Way of Peace was used. And I'll tell you today, 3 years later, we're still talking about do we have respect? Have we respected these people enough? Have we communicated with them? Maybe we're not communicating effectively. What equity do we have? What knowledge do we have? And then how do we empower not only ourselves, but those around us in order to work together? And it's interesting to me that just how quickly they could pick that up and they can see it as it works in that way. So here's one of the things is that the collaborating with Indigenous people became one of the major priorities of the International Joint Commission. I always say that I worked with the International Joint Commission many years, and that no good deed goes unpunished. So they then made me a commissioner, which was to oversee this. But we're deep into the process of talking to Indigenous people in all of the basins across the country to find out how they know about us and how we can, with our mandates between the two governments, that we may be able to help the environment and that we need their help. And interesting, which I did know that would happen. Each one of those communities that we've approached have all extended the hand of friendship and are saying, how can we work together? And so we're beginning to bring those things together and beginning to work with them. I would all, like I said, with the IJC, we all look at short-term things, but we also look at long-term. And they were quite fascinated by this concept of the 7 generations and wanted to know what it meant. And the way it was explained to me when I was young was that the 7 generations to come. But if we look at it from my point of view, I can know 7 generations. I knew my great-grandmother, I know my grandmother, and I know my mother. And then I'm standing there. Now I know my children, and I know my grandchildren, and hopefully I live long enough that I may know my great-grandchildren. And so those 7 generations, including myself in there, are people I know and care for. I want to protect them. I want them to have a better world than I do. And so if I'm that great-grandmother in the past, why wouldn't I care about that great-great-grandchild in the future? My great-great-grandfather, if I was the great-great-grandchild down here, he planted walnut trees at 6 Nations, knowing full well that he would never harvest them and that it would be far, far in the future before those walnut trees would even be looked at. When I was about 10 years old, my grandfather cut one of those trees down in order to make furniture. And I tell you what, it was the first time I ever saw him weep. So again, this work with the 7 generations is near and dear to our hearts, and that we look because we know those people and we know the impacts we can have upon them. I put some books in here, and I read weird stuff sometimes, but I like these. And these are, I call them intriguing books. And I use a book by Peter Farbs called Man's Rise to Civilization. I can forward these slides to you so that you've got them and you've got this book list. But by Peter Farbs out of the Smithsonian. And it's quite a good book because it talks about the ancient world as I know it. American Genesis was a book written in about 1981. And it said that the land bridge between Europe, Asia, Europe on the ice and Asia over the Bering Sea worked in both directions. Our people went to Europe and also went to Asia, and your people came over and we mixed as we went back and forth. 1491 is a great book to read because it looks at the world before from an anthropology point of view. And I like Thomas King's book, The Inconvenient Indian. He doesn't call it a history, he calls it an account. But he relates favorite myths that we have sometimes about Indigenous people. and how we work together. And just recently, oh, where did I go? There it is. And just recently, the Scientific American, May 2021, put out the Journey into the Americas, which looks at the genetics and the archaeology discoveries and the new story that we hear today. And suddenly I'm starting to realize that what I was taught in university about those 1,000 naked people running around in North America is not what we see today. We know that there were millions of people in North America, many of them in very sophisticated societies, very complex in their structures, knowing the land and being there. And so I'm glad that now we're beginning to understand the genesis of North America. So again, that's more or less what I wanted to talk to you about. I think I might be over a little bit over time, but you did the dangerous thing of giving a Seneca the floor. Among my people, we say that oh, there we go. We say that you're doing a very dangerous thing when you give a Seneca a floor, because my people were the orators, and I've been taught since I was knee-high to a grasshopper, how to address many people. I think when I was 9 years old, 10 years old, I gave my first speech to 10 clan mothers and about 100 people on Seneca morals and ethics. And I could almost give it to you now again. It was so impressed upon me. And at that point, when I had given that speech, my grandfather came forward, and an orator is given a cane, that you can tap out cadence with. And I was given my orator's cane in order that I was then proclaimed as an orator. From then on, people expected me to speak, whether it was with the Mohawk Council or even with the IJC. People will say, Henry, tell us about this. This is important. And I've been gifted enough to be able to do that. So that's a little bit about me, and I hope that this helps you in your work, because I think we're in a really exciting time. The discoveries we're going to make in the future are going to be amazing. And the Haudenosaunee people and the other Native people will still have that hand of friendship extended to you, even after all of the horrible things that have happened in our past. We'll still be able to work together in peace. So thank you.
Okay, thank you, Henry. That was really good, very inspirational. We're going to open the floor at this time for some questions. We have about another 15 minutes if you want to ask questions. And if you want to write them in the chat, or else maybe if you want to raise your hand, we'll give you that opportunity to interact with Henry. So the floor is open. I can't see who's.
Don't be shy now. I know you people are shy, because when I went through the Thanksgiving address, and I asked you, do you think that the people of the world are important? I could see a couple of you there.
Okay, well, we have a question. Kimia Shadkami, if you want to ask your question. Okay, go ahead.
Thank you. I do have one question. I was an international student, and I've recently graduated, and I know a lot more international students in Canada. I wonder if you would still recommend the books that you did, or you might have something else in mind that someone who comes to Canada and is totally fresh to everything might pick up and know more about.
Well, I would suggest those books that I had on the slide there. Like I said, I'll send them to you, the bibliography there that you can use. If you want to pick up something to read right off the bat, read Thomas King. It's not a heavy tome, you know, that you're going to be learning all of this nomenclature and stuff about our people. It's very light to read. It's easy to read. And I think that it's more in tune with the way our people teach. My grandfather used to call the way that it's taught outside hard teaching. But the way that our people teach is soft teaching, in which we tell stories. We relate our own experiences. We show how the principle works. We work through that with the person. And in that soft teaching, or that soft way of teaching, I find that I remember much better. The hard way of teaching, I read a book and I probably forget 90% of it. So I would say to you, this is more in keeping with that soft teaching. I think you'll learn quite a bit from the book. If, however, you want to read the tome, then read something like, Man's Rise to Civilization, if you can find it, or 1491. So there's something there for everybody in that list. I tried to put together something that I think would be useful to you.
Thank you so much.
Okay, the next one is Lucy Sharat.
Thank you. Thank you so much for
Thank you.
talking with us and talking through also traditional knowledge, some of the ways that it's been seen as limited. And I just wonder, with the terms science and traditional knowledge, are there other ways that you would describe, you just talked about soft teaching or soft way of teaching. There's often, ways that knowledge are underestimated. Are there other words that you would use to help us say how important traditional knowledge is and how flexible and important it is? Is it science? Is it traditional knowledge? Is it a way of seeing? It's all of these things. Are there other words, or I'm sure there would be so many stories.
Well,
Thank you.
to me, if I were to want to use a language, remember that science isn't just science. There's hundreds of different fields. As a biologist, I would love to have been able to speak Seneca, because I think Seneca, it in the way it's taught and the way it works, can adequately describe the processes of ecology. English is horrible. Not that I put your language down, but I find it very cumbersome to try to say something that's quite complex. It's like I was saying about Haudenosaunee and string theory. The highest form of physics, the string physicists are beginning to learn Haudenosaunee so they can talk about string theory. To me, a language that helps you understand is the words that you want to use. English is very good at describing things. In minute detail, it can describe things. French, I find French very, very good for expressing emotion and expressing those type of things. German, I find very structured into the way it looks at the world. So each of those languages have skills and patterns that are useful in some way or another. So I think that one of the things we keep looking for is, what is that magic word which will describe everything? And I don't think it's there. I think what we have to do is we have to start learning. In North America, I'm sad to say, many people are proud that they only speak one language. That changed when I went into Europe and talked to European people. There, I could talk to a kid and he spoke 3 or 4 languages. If you go to China, some of those people in China will speak 4, 5, 6 languages and dialects. And so I think what we need to do is we need to expand our way in which we talk. We have to look to see what is in which language can best suit us for what subject we're looking at. And maybe that's what we're going to have to do in the future. well, we're going to have to start thinking about this. I know my daughter, like I said, she loves Mohawk for talking about geology. So I don't know what it is in Mohawk because I don't speak Mohawk well, but she feels that it's really good to do that. And what about the other languages? You know, what about Cree? What about Apache? What about Cheyenne? Each of them must have had some way. I know that when I talk to my friends out on the prairies, if they're talking one of the Cree languages out there or Assiniboine, suddenly I'm sitting there going, because they're saying a whole bunch of words that sound so exciting, but I can't understand it. So, you know, again, it's hard to do that.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Henry. The next one is Robin Forrest.
Hello, I'm Robin Forrest. I work for Fisheries and Oceans, and your words were very important for me to hear today. Thank you very much for a wonderful talk. I just have a question. I really enjoyed your description of waging peace. And I think at this time in the world, it's important to think about that more. And I just wondered if you had more to say about waging peace. Thank you.
Well, waging peace requires that people think. And I'm going to say this, the way the Haudenosaunee look at it, we had no court systems. We had no laws per se. We had only the concepts of responsibility, that each person has responsibility. And if you didn't fulfill your responsibility, we could see only two reasons for that. One reason was that you were sick. If you're sick, your mind is not working well, the good mind isn't there to be able to bring you to good conclusion, good ideas. And so you must be healed. The medicine people would come to you through ceremony, through medicines, to see how we would heal you. Give you an example that if I had a cold or was feeling sick, I'm not allowed to do an opening because that sickness may affect my mind and not be able to speak the words and be truthful about them. The other thing that we'd say is that if you're not sick, then you must be ignorant. You must not know how to do that. And so therefore my responsibility to you is to teach you, why you should be doing those things. And we believe that if you're smart enough and you're working enough and you're doing, even if you're young enough, the word should be used so that the person can understand why they should be doing that. I know that we have conflicts between countries that I see right now. And I hate to say this that way, but you know, the aggressions that we see today, I think are aggressions of a sick society, sick people that are there. So how can we teach them? How can we show them the right way in which to work while they're in this period of sickness, you know, trying to destroy whatever's there? And again, I go back to my own people. Our leader, the Tohodaho, in the past, was the worst person in the world. We're matriarchal, matriloquial, and matrilinear as well. And it was said that he consumed his 12 daughters. That's how evil he was. But when the peacemaker came to him and whispered in his ear these words of peace, he couldn't ignore the knowledge. And when that knowledge hit him, he suddenly realized that he was wrong and began to talk about how to do peace. So I think we got to keep our heads about us. We have to send the teachers in. We have to send the medicine people in because they're necessary. And the medicine just doesn't cure the body. It also has to look how to cure the soul. So it's a tough job. It's not easy. You know, like I was saying, when I was 12, I was thinking maybe I didn't want to be Haudenosaunee because it was too hard to take care of everything.
There's one more question here, and Joanne, Joyce, and then there's a few questions in the chat that we're going to read out after, if you could answer them. Okay, so Joanne.
Thank you. And thank you very much for your presentation. I enjoyed it very much and learned a lot. My question, you must have read from my mind because you answered it before I asked it. I saw or listened to on CBC an item about an Anishinaabe teacher from Manitoulin Island in Ontario who, and my question to you was going to be, how is traditional ecological knowledge linked with language? Because he was talking about the things he had learned from his grandmother, the plants that he had learned about from his grandmother, and that the use of it and the ecological details of it were tied up in the language. The example he gave was sturgeon potato, which was something that the sturgeon liked at the time that they were still, he didn't use the word amphibious, but when they were still on land, that's how long the language had been, that it addressed very deep history. And when he learned about the sturgeon potato and worked with a group of researchers who were netting sturgeon, they rubbed the sturgeon potato in the nets and they got as many sturgeon in an afternoon as they had got 4 years previously. That was the story that caught me the most because it, anyway, I shouldn't be doing the talking, I should be doing the asking, but it sounded very full of promise for Indigenous languages and culture.
Well, I would say to you that you answer your own question. You know, it's by listening to each other and by having those people who still have the knowledge of that. You know, I remember talking to a fisheries person here in Haudenosaunee from Queens, who's a good friend of mine, and we were talking about eels. And I said to him, well, the Haudenosaunee knew all about eels. We know that they, for example, all of the yellow eels in the Great Lakes are all females. But when they turn to silver eels, which we call spirit eels, suddenly about 25% of them become male. They change. And when I said that to him, he said, the biologists are just figuring that out. I said, well, why didn't they ask us? You know, we know that. We know what glass eels are, but we never see them in the St. Lawrence River. But our friends, the Mi'kmaq, trade with us because I gather the glass eels, I've never actually eaten them, taste like anchovies. So great for Indian tacos. Put them on the tacos and it just makes them, give you that fishy taste to them, and it's great. I didn't know that, and yet this is traditional knowledge of our people. The elvars, which are the smaller black eels, were the eels that we did a lot of smoking and smoked those. And then I find out from the Japanese that that's what ugani is when they do sushi. They smoke the glass eels, not the glass eels, the elvars, because they're the right size to give you that good flavor that they have. So I love sushi and I love Japanese eel because that reminds me of my own home. So there's a piece of traditional knowledge that the biologists, the fisheries people, didn't understand, but could have heard it. I give you another example in that in medicine, I can just see a black robe, you know, a couple 100 years ago, trying to figure out what we thought about medicine. And so he walks to the medicine man and says, medicine man, what causes disease? What causes sickness? The medicine man sitting there looks up at him and goes, wow, what am I going to tell him? Am I going to talk to him about Bar-T viruses? Or I'm going to talk to him about fungal infections, bacteria? I don't even think he knows about that. It's spirits. Oh, religious man. Spirits cause disease. And if you go into any text nowadays, you find Native people believe that spirits cause disease. Why? Because he ran away, wrote it all down really carefully, put it in a book, and that knowledge has been passed on and on and on. And yet the knowledge from my grannies and the medicine people I know, they know exactly what causes those things. They might never have seen a bacteria or those, but they know that it's something that small that can spread that quick. That was the reason why when smallpox and measles and those things started to spread through our people, we very quickly dispersed and were in small communities that were isolated from each other, because that was really the only way we knew we could protect each other. When invasive species came, we developed refugia, areas where we knew we could put animals and plants where they would be safe, for example, in the Adirondacks or in the Great Deserts, where those other creatures couldn't get at them. So again, we understood these processes, but we had no words to describe it to the people on the outside. So I think what we really need right now is a lot of translators, people who are really in tune with trying to translate between us and between others. I think we'll get to a point where there'll be no traditional knowledge. There'll just be science. And it'll be a science that integrates all of our knowledge together so that we can use it. Remember too that for Haudenosaunee people, knowledge is gender specific. There is women's knowledge and there are men's knowledge. And we hope that the women learn the knowledge, for example, that they need to take care of the water. I may not be good at doing that, but women seem to be the ones that can do that. I'm good at fire. I love fire, so I can take care of that for you. But why do we have to have the knowledge both ways? We know that there are many different spirited people out there, and they may be the crossovers for us. They weave back and forth between the sexes in order to bring the knowledge, translate it between us. So everyone has a purpose, everyone has a responsibility, and it's the task of the individual to find out what that responsibility is and what their purpose is, and go out and do it. Do it to the best that you can.
Thank you, Henry. I think we're pretty much at the end of our session. It was really good. I really enjoyed it. We have a few comments on the chat. Maybe I'll just get Jennifer to just quickly read out at least one question.
Okay. We have a question here from Hannah Size. I hope I said this right. Sizeberg or Steisberg. She says, how can I keep peaceful and optimistic inside when my job is to study climate change and study disaster in the making? What kind of thoughts will help people like me?
You know, I would say to you that the Haudenosaunee people and the Indigenous people of North America have seen climate change a number of times. We've watched huge societies fall apart. We've seen societies collapse because they didn't take into account what they were doing to the societies. The reason that the Haudenosaunee are in upstate New York and in through the area where we live is because we migrated from the deep south in Latin America and South America. My grandfather used to tell me that we were the stone builders. We were the people that cut stone and build the pyramids. And when their society collapsed, our people migrated north. We left, and we continue to do that. But for the individual, for the person, I would say to you, take joy in the individual miracles you see every day. This, if you look behind me, you can see that this is a path, right? That goes through the bush. I make it a purpose every day to go walking down that path. Whether it's snow, rain, I don't care. Because I know along that path, I'm going to see a miracle. It may be a bud. It may be an animal. It may be something, but it'll give me joy. And you have to take the time to do that. It's like when I was saying to you, you have to wage peace. Somebody would say, is that relaxing for you? course it's relaxing, but I'm walking down a path. I'm busy, I'm working, I'm trying to get out there. I want to see the miracle. And it's hilarious because I don't think you can see them now, but many people walk up and down this path. And just recently, somebody has been painting rocks. And on each rock, there's a statement that says, you know, dare to be great. And it's just by the side. You walk by it and you read it and you go, yeah, I can do that. And you'll maybe 100 yards, 200 yards further on, there's another one. Well, somebody has taken the time and effort to show you a miracle. And I don't know how many other people may walk by them and not even see them. But those that do see them, I think, can start weathering. And yeah, life is tough. There are 3 o'clock in the morning sometimes when I'm beat up and feel like I'm really in bed. I may sit there and despair for the world. But at that point, I know that I can go for a walk. I can go out and see those stones. I can see the squirrels that are running around. And when I was young and very sick, it was a great day when I could get out to go see my friend the badger. And he would talk to me. Talked in whistles and grunts, even worse than some of the languages that we had. But I tell you, I think I understood him. And so, again, those are the things that give you courage. My great-grandmother never gave up. My grandmother never gave up. And my mother never gives up. And I'll tell you what, I get a strong daughter that she's not going to give up either. So we're going to continue. And I think by talking together like this, we give each other courage to continue. So thank you.
Okay, thank you, Henry. I think that this is at the end of our session. And I want to thank you for joining us today for the first speaker for our series. And I want to thank you on behalf of the University of Manitoba, Faculty of Science, and our Dean, Brian Mark, is also here, which I really appreciate. And the committee thanks you, and we all thank you.
I just wanted to say to you that,
Miigwech.
I just wanted to say to you that I opened out, just do an instant closing when it can be done very quickly. I would say to you that we thank everything around us, and I've been overjoyed to be able to talk to you. I ask something of the Creator, though, and we say we must never ask, but on your behalf, I'll ask that as you leave this place and you go to your homes, your lodgings, and your communities, that no impediment is placed in your way and you arrive there safely. And the second thing I ask on your behalf is that you see the happy, smiling faces of your people, and that no misfortune has befallen them while you've been here. So now we cover our council fire, and I untie that rope that binds us together in this one place, that we may be each able to go our own separate way. But I call on you one last time to bring together your finest thoughts and your finest thanksgiving, that we pile in a huge pile before us to send to the Creator of all things for the beauty that surrounds us. Now I'll go.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Okay.